All right, let's jump straight into this explainer because today we are looking at something that absolutely defies logic, statistics, and frankly, human comprehension. We are talking about surviving the impossible, and not just surviving one catastrophic, once-in-a-century disaster, but surviving it twice, or somehow even 3 times. Today, we're going to walk through the unbelievable true stories of two historical figures who stared down the absolute most devastating events of the 20th century and actually walked away. I mean, just imagine for a second surviving an atomic blast. The blinding flash, brighter than 1,000 suns, the sheer, unimaginable destructive force of it all. Now imagine being told you have to survive it a second time. Seriously, what are the odds of that? Statistically speaking, it's essentially zero. But for a naval engineer named Tsutomu Yamaguchi, this wasn't some hypothetical question. This was literally his life. What makes Yamaguchi's story just so unbelievably wild is how compressed his timeline was. On August 6, 1945, Yamaguchi was on a business trip in Hiroshima. At 8:15 a.m., the little boy atomic bomb dropped. He was just 3 kilometers from the epicenter. He was thrown violently into the air, his eardrums burst, and he suffered severe, terrible burns to his face and arms. But he survived by diving into a drainage ditch. And despite these horrific injuries, you know what he wanted? He just wanted to get back to his family. So on August 8th, entirely covered in bandages, he boards a train to his hometown. And that hometown happened to be Nagasaki. He arrives and, like an incredibly dedicated worker, reports to his office at Mitsubishi the very next morning, August 9th. So get this, he's literally in his boss's office, trying to explain the sheer scale of destruction he had just witnessed in Hiroshima, a story, by the way, that his boss actually refused to believe. And right then, another blinding white flash fills the room. At 11:02 a.m., the Fat Man bomb dropped. Once again, Yamaguchi was exactly 3 kilometers from the blast. And once again, impossibly, he survived. He is the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government as a survivor of both atomic bombs. He battled radiation sickness, high fevers, his wounds reopening, but miraculously, this man lived to be 93 years old. Okay, we're going to pivot now from the terrifying dawn of the atomic age with Yamaguchi to a completely different era entirely, the golden age of floating palaces. We're going to look at a woman named Violet Jessup. Her story completely unifies our theme of defying impossible odds, but it takes place out on the treacherous, freezing waters of the North Atlantic. Part 1. The Floating Palaces, a grueling reality. You know, at the turn of the 20th century, way before airplanes were really a thing, the ocean liner completely ruled the waves. Shipping companies were building these massive, increasingly luxurious ships designed to basically be floating palaces for the ultra-wealthy. But if we look at the historical research detailing the forgotten lives of female maritime workers, it paints a completely different picture. For wealthy passengers, sure, these ships were luxurious vacations. But for working-class women like Violet Jessup, who actually only went to sea to support her siblings after her father passed away, the reality was incredibly dangerous, physically punishing, and completely overlooked by history. The sea was very much a male-dominated space, and the women working below decks had to navigate a seriously tough environment. Being a stewardess back then was definitely not some romantic adventure. It was a pure economic necessity. We're talking brutal 16-hour workdays, constantly on their feet, carrying heavy silver trays, all while battling their own relentless seasickness. They also had to adhere to these ridiculously strict uniform rules. Gray dresses, no short sleeves, plain black shoes, zero jewelry. The whole point was to quote-unquote asexualize them so they wouldn't distract the male crew or passengers. Jessup actually noted herself that her uniform made her look like a prison wardess.
Part 2. The escalation, collision of the Olympic.
So Violet joins the White Star Line, which was the premier shipping company of the era. And in 1911, while serving on the RMS Olympic, her terrifying timeline officially begins. The Olympic was the absolute largest civilian liner at the time. During a voyage, this massive ship collides violently with a British warship, the HMS Hawke. The Olympic gets badly damaged, taking a massive hole right to its hull. Thankfully, no one was killed, and Jessup was completely uninjured. But this major collision, it essentially served as a very dark foreshadowing for the absolute nightmare that was waiting for her just around the corner.
Part 3. The sinking of the Titanic.
Fast forward to 1912. Violet is chosen for the absolute best-of-class crew for the maiden voyage of the unsinkable RMS Titanic. We all know how this goes. On the night of April 14th, the Titanic sideswipes an iceberg. Violet, who had just been in her bunk reading a prayer book, is ordered up on deck.
Her specific job was to act perfectly calm to set an example for the non-English speaking passengers who couldn't understand the evacuation orders. So, she's ordered into Lifeboat 16 just to show the other women that it's safe. Right as she gets in, a ship's officer abruptly calls out, "Here, Miss Jessup, look after this baby," and literally drops a stranger's infant right into her lap as the boat is lowered into the freezing dark. And from that tiny wooden boat, she had to watch the largest ship in the world completely disappear under the water. The next morning, Violet and her lifeboat are finally rescued by the RMS Carpathia. And this is where a truly bizarre detail happens. While she's standing there shivering on the deck of the rescue ship, still tightly clutching this infant she had managed to keep alive all night, a woman, presumably the terrified mother, runs right up to her, snatches the baby directly out of Violet's arms, and completely disappears into the crowded deck without saying a single word. Violet survived, but she was left standing there with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back. Part 4. Into the propellers. HMS Britannic. Now, I don't know about you, but most of us would literally never look at a bathtub again after surviving the Titanic. But when World War I broke out, Jessup bravely signs up as a Red Cross nurse on the Titanic's sister ship, the HMHS Britannic. And on November 21st, 1916, disaster strikes a third time. The Britannic hits a submerged naval mine and starts sinking rapidly. Violet rushes to the lifeboats, but there's a huge problem. The captain is still trying to beach the ship, which means those massive rear propellers are still spinning furiously, rising up out of the water. As Violet's lifeboat hits the ocean, it gets caught in the ship's suction. The lifeboat is being pulled directly into those massive spinning blades. Her own visceral, horrifying account notes that the propellers were, quote, churning and mincing up everything near them. Men, boats, and everything was just one ghastly whirl. Okay, let's walk through her escape here, step by step, because it's intense. Seeing the boat right in front of her just get completely destroyed by the propellers, Violet has to make a split-second life or death decision. Step 1, she leaps out of the doomed lifeboat directly into the ocean. Step 2, the immense suction of the sinking ship instantly pulls her deep underwater. Step 3, as she's struggling in the dark, she violently strikes her head against the keel of the ship. She actually found out later she sustained a severe skull fracture from this. So what saved her? She credited her extraordinarily thick auburn hair for cushioning the devastating blow just enough to keep her conscious. And finally, step 4, she somehow floats back to the surface and is hauled to safety by another lifeboat. Which brings us to a frankly staggering number. 3. Violet Jessup didn't just survive one historic maritime disaster, she survived catastrophic, history-making incidents on all 3 of the White Star Line's Olympic-class sister ships: the collision of the Olympic, the sinking of the Titanic, and the sinking of the Britannic. I mean, it is a statistical anomaly that is just almost impossible to fully wrap your head around. Part 5. A lifetime of resilience. So how do you even go on living after hitting the absolute limits of human survival? Not just once, but multiple times. Well, both of them took incredible, yet very different paths. Take Tsutomu Yamaguchi. He took the unimaginable horror of surviving 2 atomic bombs and turned his entire life into a mission of peace. He wrote poetry about his experiences, became a passionate, outspoken peace activist, and spent his later years meeting with world leaders, campaigning tirelessly for global nuclear disarmament. And then there's Violet Jessup. Her response to nearly being killed by the ocean 3 separate times? She went right back to work. She returned to the sea, working on passenger liners for decades, enjoying world cruises, and she didn't even retire until 1950. She spent a total of 42 years at sea. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder here. When tragedy strikes twice, when the universe throws the most literally impossible odds at you and you somehow survive, do you run away or do you dedicate your life to that very world? Both Yamaguchi and Jessup chose not to hide. One tried to change the world for the better, and the other simply refused to let fear dictate how she lived her life. Their stories are this incredible reminder of just how unbelievably unbreakable the human spirit can actually be. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you all next time.